This is Democracy Watch. I'm joined by my co-host, voting rights attorney, and the founder of Democracy Docket, Marc Elias. So, Marc, a federal court had ordered Louisiana to redraw its congressional maps to include a second black majority district. Louisiana has now objected to that ruling. Can you explain where we stand now on this case?
Yeah, Louisiana doesn't want to follow the law. You know, when Louisiana lost in the trial court before, it pinned all of its hopes and dreams at being able to continue to have illegal maps on the Alabama case that we've talked about, right? Their hope was we're just going to like tail behind Alabama. So we're going to go to the Supreme Court and say, we're just like Alabama, because they thought they were going to win Alabama.
Right.
But then they lost Alabama, and now they're like, no, we're not at all like Alabama. We're totally different than Alabama. So that's what's going on right now, is they're trying to delay the inevitability, which is a second majority black district.
And so now they want to bring this to a full trial, but what is the point of a full trial? The issue was already litigated, as you just said, by the Supreme Court. So what are they hoping that a trial is going to uncover?
Delay. They want to slow everything down, right? At this point, Brian, people need to understand the Republicans are playing for time, one election cycle at a time, right? So their goal is not, I don't think, because I think this has been dashed by the Supreme Court's decision, is not to actually like win the case. Their goal is to have one more election cycle under illegal maps. And so you see that strategy in Alabama. You see that strategy very, very directly in Louisiana, where the state is just filing this and that and every which way of objections and arguments, because they're hoping that they can stretch this out long enough that they get to have an illegal map again for 2024.
I mean, we've spoken about that with the Alabama case, but is there any way that Louisiana Republicans could delay this thing so that it won't take effect, so that a new map wouldn't take effect by 2024?
Look, I think the U.S. Supreme Court is pretty clear. If you read the opinion at the end of the Alabama opinion, they say that this needs to proceed now in time for 2024. I don't think the Supreme Court wants to hear back from either Alabama or Louisiana, or for that matter, Georgia or Texas, about more delays. I think they have kind of like done their redistricting case, their big VRA case, and now they expect the states to fall in line. So I don't think it's going to succeed, Brian, but it doesn't mean they're not going to try. So I don't think it's going to delay things, but I think that we're just going to see a whole lot of this, which, like I said, we saw in Alabama with the ridiculously illegal map they passed.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing in Louisiana with the efforts they're trying to get a full trial in.
Well, now, delay notwithstanding, what do Louisiana Republicans plan on arguing in court? Like, how do they plan on I know they're not trying to win this case, but what do they intend on even saying to bolster their case, given what we already know now from Allen versus Milligan?
Sure. So they've got two arguments that they're basically making. One is, I know we told you we're just like Alabama. We're actually nothing like Alabama, right? So their first argument is that the Alabama decision actually doesn't mean anything because our state begins with an L, not with an A, right? So like they have a whole series of arguments about why the legal arguments that were applicable in Alabama are in fact different. The facts are different in Louisiana. The second is that they are trying to argue that Alabama really wasn't as clearly a victory for the good guys as we make it out to be, that there was more gray area in there. So those are kind of the two big strains of their arguments. The first is basically, arguments over facts, over what the facts on the ground look like, what the geography, the demography of the state is. The second is arguments over the law.
Yeah, although I don't know how much gray area there is in the Supreme Court telling you that you are going to have to draw a second black district. So it doesn't seem too gray to me, but I guess.
No, but look at Alabama. Alabama, they had a court order that said draw two majority black districts or very close to it, and then they drew one barely majority black district, another one not at all close to it. Right. So there we are.
Yeah, well, numbers are hard. So I guess I can almost see where that 39% is. It looks like a 50 to them, but it's the party of Marjorie Taylor Greene. So, Marc, given the fact that we likely won't see Louisiana Republicans draw a map that ultimately does comport with the court's ruling, who will ultimately draw that final map, and how do we have any assurance that it'll actually be fair? Because there is always the risk here that a right-wing judge might, basically participate in their antics.
Look, I think the fact that the courts have found liability suggests that the courts want there to be a remedy, right? I don't think the courts are finding that they have violated the Voting Rights Act only to then engage in a process or tolerate a process that doesn't actually remedy the harms that they themselves have found. So I don't worry so much about that. I think that, courts, broadly speaking, have two options when they need to impose a new map. Obviously they give a chance to the legislature to do a remedial map, but when that fails, they basically have two choices. Number one, they just pick one of the maps that the plaintiffs submitted, right? So in each of these cases, the people challenging the maps, my law firm in disclosure represents plaintiffs in both cases, like they submit maps. They're like, here are examples of maps you could that would comply with the Voting Rights Act. That's part of the underlying lawsuit. So one choice that they have is they just pick one of those maps. The other alternative they have is that they hire what's called a special master, which is basically, think of it as just an outsider, usually an academic, someone who has no stake in the process, gets hired by the court, is given instructions, to use the Alabama example again. Your instruction is to draw two majority Black districts or as close as possible, or whatever the language was, and then they draw it, and then the court adopts that. So those are kind of the two avenues available to them.
Now, you alluded to this before, but Alabama Republicans are also currently trying to pull the same stunt here. Can you give an update on what's happening in that state?
Sure. So the Alabama legislature was under a court order affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court to draw two majority Black districts, or one and another that is very, very close. So I think the court held out the possibility you could have one at, say, 55% and one at 49.9 or 49.8, right? Instead, the legislature did a whole bunch of theater. Like it had a map, had maps drawn in the both chambers. It went through all of this theater only to settle on a map that is clearly in violation of that court order. Like clearly in violation of the court order. If you look up in the dictionary, how do I violate a court order? A picture of that map would be found.
Yeah.
So, so they drew a map that, as you point out, is 39%. The second district is 39% Black, which is not nearly 50%. And so now there's going to be a hearing on August 14th. In Alabama, I suspect those three judges who ordered this initially are not going to be entertained by the state of Alabama's work. And then we will go from there. I assume the court will probably have a special master draw a compliant map.
Now, on the topic of the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act cases, can you also give an update on the maps in both Georgia and Texas and when we could expect to see some movement in those states?
Yeah, so Georgia is, sort of humming along. The court recently denied summary judgment motions that would have essentially dismissed the plaintiff's case. Again, my law firm represents the plaintiffs there. So the state took another shot at trying to get the case kicked out. That was denied. The court set it for trial for this fall. So that case is going to go to trial. There's going to be a resolution. When you read the order, it's pretty clear which way the court is leaning. The court wants to hear live testimony from the experts and the like. But I think by the time we hit by the time the leaves are falling from the trees, not in Georgia necessarily, but up in New England, I think we will have a new map being drawn in Georgia. Texas further behind. Much more complicated case. Lot more plaintiffs, lot more going on. You have different regions of the state, different kinds of claims, some involving Hispanic voting rights being denied, some involving Black voters having their votes their vote diluted. So more going on there. I think you're looking at a later time frame, maybe end of year, but I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about Texas when we get a little more clarity on that.
Okay, and just on the topic of maps being redrawn, do you have any update as to when we might see some movement in New York?
Yeah, so look, New York was told to draw to the Independent Redistricting Commission, I should say, the bipartisan commission that in New York is constitutionally responsible and obligated to draw maps, was ordered to draw a new one forthwith, which is like our legal word of the day. It means immediately. It means this instance. It has now been a few days. They more than a week. They have not forthwith taken action. So I just saw that as expected, the Republicans are appealing that case to the High Court in New York. That's again as expected, but I am very confident that the Independent Redistricting Commission is going to comply with the court order. We will get another round of maps in New York in time for the 2024 elections.
And that's a high court, by the way, that now has a new liberal judge on it. And also the chief judge, who is also a liberal, was one of the judges who dissented to the 2022 ruling, which put those maps in the hands of a Republican-leaning neutral map maker. So, Mark, just one more thing here. I know that you took issue with a lot of the reporting. I know that New York Times put forward a report with the way that they framed Alabama Republicans deciding not to follow the order that was set forth by the Supreme Court in Allen versus Milligan. Can you just speak on that?
Yeah, I mean, no one should say, no reporter, no newspaper, no headline should say that when there is a court order and it's not followed, that someone declined to follow it, right? You decline a dinner invitation because you're busy.
Yeah.
You decline the opportunity to go to the movies. When you're ordered to do something by a court, you don't decline to do it, right? You defy it, right? You defy a court order. And so I think that some of the coverage was excellent, but some of the coverage, I think, just couldn't help but let a little of both sides creep into this. Like, there isn't two sides to this. Arguably, there was two sides before the U.S. Supreme Court issued its ruling. But after the Supreme Court issued its decision, there's no longer two sides. The state of Alabama is not complying with the court's order.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly put, and I hope some of that kind of seeps into this relentless both sides coverage that we've seen, ad nauseum over the last God knows how many years. With that said, Mark, thank you to you and your team for the work that you do to protect voting rights and democracy across the country, including in these specific cases in Louisiana and Alabama and on, where, like you said, you're representing the plaintiffs here. So for anybody watching, if you want to help Mark and help his team, then please sign up for Democracy Docket. It's a free news outlet focused on voting and elections. The link is right here on the screen, and it's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.